I have stood at that gate for 11 years. 11 years of rain running down the inside of my collar. 11 years of schoolchildren pulling faces at me, of men in suits trying to make me laugh, of women asking if I was real. I never moved. That was the whole job. That was the entire art of it. And on the morning of the 14th of March, I broke it. I turned my head. I turned my head because a black car came out of the East Arch at 20 minutes to 7 in the morning, and in the back of it, sitting very small and very straight, was the king's 7-year-old daughter. And the man driving her was not allowed to. The morning. Let me tell you about that morning first. Because people always want the loud part, and the loud part came later, and it wasn't the part that changed anything. Thornevale in March is a gray business. The palace sits at the top of a long slope of gravel and old trees, and when the fog comes off the river it fills that slope like milk poured into a bowl. You can be standing at Gate 3 and not see the fountain, which is 40 feet away. You hear it. You never see it. I came on duty at 5:10. Relieved Corporal Nettle, who had a cold and had been coughing into his sleeve all night and looked like a man who wanted to be dead. He said, "Quiet one, Sarge." I said, "Good." That was our whole conversation. We had known each other 9 years. Gate 3 is not the ceremonial gate. Tourists don't come to Gate 3. The tourists go round the front to the wide black railings and the two lads in the boxes who get photographed 4,000 times a day and are not permitted to sneeze. Gate 3 is the working gate. Kitchen deliveries, gardeners, the laundry vans, the doctors when there are doctors, and staff cars. Staff cars come out of the East Arch and they turn left along the service road and they pass me, and I look at the driver and I look at the sheet on my clipboard, and if the two match, I lift the barrier. That's it, that's the job. Match the face to the sheet. 11 years. The sheet that morning had 4 movements on it. A dairy lorry at 5:30 which came. A florist's van at 6 which came. A Dr. Marbury at 7:15, which was a regular thing. The Queen Consort had trouble sleeping and Marbury came Tuesdays and Fridays, and it was 14th of March and it was a Friday, so fine. And a car for the Lord Chamberlain's office at 9. 4 movements. That was all that was authorized to leave through the East Arch that morning. I had read it twice. I always read it twice. Nettle used to laugh at me for it. At 6:31 I heard an engine start somewhere deep under the arch, where the garages are. The sound came out flat and hollow, the way sound does under stone. I remember thinking, that's early for Marbury. I remember thinking, and Marbury doesn't drive himself. The car. It came slow. That's the first thing that was wrong, and I want to be honest. At the time it didn't feel wrong. It felt considerate. The gravel is loose along that stretch, and if you come out fast, you throw stones at the topiary and the head gardener writes letters about it. Everybody comes out slow. The car was a dark saloon. Not a palace car. Palace cars have the small enamel roundel on the wing, just under the mirror, and this one didn't. Private plate. I could read it from where I stood because it was the only thing in the world that wasn't fog. It came down the last 20 feet and stopped at my barrier, and the window came down about 4 inches, and it was Mr. Aldencourt. Rufus Aldencourt, the Queen Consort's son, not the King's. Hers from before, from the first marriage, the one nobody in that building said out loud. He was 34. He had his mother's mouth and none of her stillness. I knew him the way you know weather. He'd been in and out of the palace for 6 years. He was pleasant to me exactly as often as it suited him, and he had never once learned my name. "Morning, Sergeant." "Sir." He was smiling. He had a very good smile, Aldencourt. It was the kind of smile that arrives before you've said anything, so that whatever you say next feels rude. "Filthy out," he said. "It is, sir." And I looked past him. I don't know why. I've asked myself that for a long time now. I've been asked it by better men than me, in rooms with tape recorders, and I've never had a good answer. There was nothing to see. The rear glass was tinted but not so dark you couldn't make out shapes, and there was a shape. Small, pale, not moving. Princess Eloan was sitting in the back seat of that car in a green coat, with her hood up, and she was looking straight ahead at nothing at all. 7 years old. She wasn't crying. I want to be clear about that because it mattered later, and because people have decided since that she must have been. She wasn't. She was sitting very upright with her hands flat on her knees, like a child in a doctor's waiting room, and she was staring at the back of the driver's seat. And when the fog moved, she turned her face a little and she saw me. We looked at each other for about a second and a half. I have thought about that second and a half more than I have thought about any other second of my life. The sheet. Sir, I said, I don't have a movement for you. The smile didn't go, it adjusted. No, he said, you wouldn't, bit of a last-minute thing. I looked down at the clipboard. Derry Laurie, florist, Marbury at 7:15, Lord Chamberlain's at 9. I'll need to call it in, sir. Sergeant, he said it warmly, almost affectionately, it's the school run. Now, here is what I knew, standing there in the wet, with my chin strap cutting into me and the fountain going somewhere behind the fog. I knew the princess did not go to school. Not out. She was 7 and she was taught in the palace by a woman called Miss Furs who came at 8:30 and left at 4, and who I had lifted the barrier for perhaps 600 times. I knew that on the rare occasions the princess left the grounds she went with 2 protection officers, in a car with a roundel on the wing, and that a movement went on my sheet the night before in ink, not in pencil, and that it went on the sheet at the front gate too, and that somebody from the household rang down to confirm it, and that I signed for it. And I knew that there was no protection officer in that car. There was Mr. Aldencourt, and there was a 7-year-old girl in a green coat, and there was nobody else at all. Sir, I said, who's with her? His hands were on the wheel. He had nice gloves. I remember the gloves. Sergeant, he said, and now the warmth had gone thin like water over a road, do you want me to ring my mother? At 20 to 7. The Queen Consort, that's what he meant. That was the whole sentence. And I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it properly, because everything that came afterwards hangs off this and people have got it wrong in the papers. I was not brave. I was frightened. My hands were shaking on the clipboard, and I put the clipboard against my chest so he wouldn't see it. My mouth had gone completely dry. I had a mortgage and 2 daughters and a wife who cleaned at the district hospital, and there was a man in a car in front of me who could have me out of that uniform by lunchtime with 1 phone call, and both of us knew it. What I had was not courage. What I had was the sheet. Because the sheet is not mine. The sheet is not his. The sheet is a thing that exists outside both of us, and either a movement is on it or it is not. And 11 years of standing in the rain had made that the last solid object in the world. I'll need to call it in, sir, I said again. And I stepped back from the window. 64 seconds. I turned to the box. The box at gate 3 has a handset in it, the old kind, cream-colored, connected to the control room under the west wing. There's no dial. You lift it and it rings there and only there. I lifted it. It rang. It rang. It is a small thing, a telephone ringing. It is nothing, and I have never in my life heard a sound so loud. Because behind me I could hear the car idling, and I could feel it. You can feel a car behind you, the heat of it, the little vibration through the gravel and up through the soles of your boots, and I knew that at any moment he was going to do the thing that men like him do, which is simply drive. The barrier is a wooden pole. It weighs about 9 pounds. It stops nothing. It never stopped anything. It is a symbol, and I was standing there holding a telephone and betting a child's mourning on a symbol. Somebody picked up, a voice I didn't know, young. Control. Gate 3, Sergeant Bear. I have an unlisted movement. Private vehicle, one adult male, one child. I need authorization. Silence paper. I could hear paper. There's nothing on my board, Sergeant. No, I said, there's nothing on mine. More paper. He was a boy. I could hear him being a boy about it. Who's the adult male? And I looked at the clipboard and I wrote, and my writing that morning is terrible. It's in the file, you can see it. It looks like a man wrote it on a moving train. 0634, TV, RALDNCURTDRV. Passenger HRH Princess Aloan, no PO, no auth on sheet, called control. And I said the name out loud into the telephone. Mr. Rufus Aldencourt. I have never heard a room go quiet down a telephone line before. I heard it then. I heard a whole room, 40 feet under a palace, stop. Stand by, the boy said. The car door opened behind me. The gravel. He didn't shout. That's what nobody understands. Everyone imagines shouting. Aldencourt came and stood beside me on the gravel with his hands in his coat pockets and his breath going up white, and he looked out at the fog, and he spoke to me the way you'd speak to a dog that had done something on the carpet. Put the phone down, Sergeant. I held it against my ear. The line was open. Nobody was speaking on it. Somebody somewhere was breathing into it. She's my sister, he said. Half-sister she wasn't, but that's what he said. I'm taking her to see her grandmother, who is 89 and who is dying and who asked for her. And there's going to be a great deal of unpleasantness about it upstairs, and I am going to take that, and you are going to lift that barrier. The engine was still running. The exhaust made a little gray rope in the cold. And in the back of the car, through the glass, the child had turned round in her seat. She was up on her knees, hood fallen back, hair everywhere, both hands flat on the rear window, watching us. Watching me. I have 2 daughters. Ada was 9 that year and Bate was 5. And I want to tell you that I thought of them, because it would be a nicer thing to say, and because a man is supposed to have some noble thing in his head at the moment his life turns over. I didn't. What I thought was, there is no booster seat. That is all. That is the entire contents of my mind at the hinge of the whole affair. He was taking a 7-year-old on a 40-mile road, in March, in fog, and he had not put her in a seat. And if a man is taking a child to see her dying grandmother, he puts her in the seat, because he has thought about the child. And if he has not put her in the seat, then he has not thought about the child at all. He has thought about the getting out. And there is only one kind of man who thinks only about the getting out. Sir, I said, please step away from the barrier. He laughed. Then a light came on over the east arch. Then another one in the household wing, 3rd floor. Then 3 of them at once along the ground floor, 1, 2, 3, like something running along the building. And the telephone in my hand said, very clearly, in a voice that was not a boy's, Sergeant, do not lift the barrier. Do not let that vehicle move. Officers are with you in 90 seconds. Are you able to obstruct? And I looked down the length of that wooden pole, 9 pounds of painted timber. Yes, I said. I put the phone down, and I stood in front of the car. 90 seconds. You can measure a man's whole life in 90 seconds, if the conditions are right. He got back in. That was the worst moment. He got back in and he shut the door, and I heard the gearbox, and I stood in the middle of that gravel road with the fog wetting my face, and I watched the front wheels of a 2-ton car turn very slightly towards me. I did not move. I want to be careful here, because I have heard myself described in ways I don't recognize. I did not stand there out of some magnificent devotion to the crown. I stood there because I had spent 11 years learning how to not move, and it was the only skill I had, and it turned out that all those thousands of hours of schoolchildren pulling faces at me had been, without anyone intending it, a training for exactly one morning. The car came forward about 18 inches. Then it stopped, and Rufus Aldencourt sat behind the wheel with both hands on it and looked at me through the windscreen, And there was no smile now, none at all. And what was on his face instead was the thing I have never been able to describe properly to anybody. Not to the inquiry, not to my wife. It was calculation. He was working out, quite calmly, whether he could drive over a serving sergeant of the household guard on palace ground in front of the child, and what it would cost, and whether it was worth it. He was still working it out when the protection officers came round the corner of the East Arch at a dead run. What happened in the next 11 minutes? 4 of them. 2 went to the driver's door and 2 went to the rear, and the one who reached the rear door first, his name was Hendry. He was a big, soft-spoken man from the north who'd had a bad knee for years. Hendry opened that door and went down on both knees on the wet gravel in a 200-pound suit, and he put his arms out, and the princess came into them without a sound. Not one sound. She never made a sound the entire time. She put her face into his shoulder, and he stood up with her, and he walked her back up the slope towards the arch, and his knee must have been screaming at him, and he never once altered his pace. Audincourt got out of the car by himself. Nobody laid a hand on him. He straightened his coat. He said something to the senior officer that I couldn't hear, something short, and then he laughed again, that same laugh, and he walked up towards the house with 2 of them beside him, unhurried, like a man who has been asked to come inside for a drink. And I stayed at the gate. Because nobody had relieved me. That's the part people find funny when I tell it, and I have never understood why. There was a car abandoned across my barrier with its engine running and its driver's door hanging open, and the household was lighting up window by window like a ship going down, and I stood at my post in the fog for another 2 hours and 11 minutes, until Corporal Nettle came back with his cold and stood beside me and said, quietly, without looking at me, "They're saying it was nothing, Sarge." Nothing. By 8 that morning the word had already been chosen. I don't know who chose it. I have my ideas and I've kept them to myself for a long time. A misunderstanding. That was the word by 9. By 10 it was a family matter. By noon a man from the private secretary's office came down to gate 3 personally. They never come down to gate 3. And he was very kind and very tired-looking, and he said the Queen Consort was extremely grateful for my diligence, and that Mr. Audincourt had of course had permission from her personally the previous evening, and that the failure was clerical, and that the movement simply hadn't reached my sheet. So the sheet was wrong, I said. The sheet was incomplete, he said. And he asked, very lightly in the way that men like that ask, whether I might let him have the day's occurrence book, so it could be corrected. I want you to understand what the occurrence book is. It is a hardbound ledger, green, ruled. Every gate has one. You write in it in ink and you never, ever tear a page. If you make a mistake, you rule one line through it and initial it and write the truth underneath, and the mistake stays there forever, because the whole point of the book is that the book cannot be made to lie later. Every guard is taught this in the first week. Most of them find it faintly ridiculous. It is a Victorian object. There is a computer system now that does the same job and does it better. But there is a line in the standing orders, and it has been there since 1874, and it says the occurrence book of a gate is the property of the Crown and not of the household, and it may be surrendered to a commissioned officer of the guard or to a magistrate, and to no other person. I had never once thought about that line. Nobody has, it's furniture. And I stood at gate 3 in the fog with a very kind, very tired man from the private secretary's office holding out his hand, and I heard myself say, "Sir, I can't give you that." The entry. He asked me what was in it. I told him. There was no reason not to. He could read it in 5 minutes if he went the proper way about it. 12 lines, time, vehicle, driver, passenger, no protection officer present, no authorization on sheet, control contacted at 0634, instructed to obstruct, vehicle advanced approximately 18 inches towards obstructing officer and halted, Passenger recovered by Protection Officer Hendry at 06:47. And then the last line, which I had written at 7:10 that morning, standing in the fog with my hands shaking, because standing orders say that where a gate officer forms a belief that a criminal offense may have occurred on or adjacent to palace ground, he shall so record, and it is not a discretion, it is a shall. And I had read those orders every year for 11 years, and never once thought I would use that line. In the opinion of this officer, the circumstances disclose a possible offense of child abduction, recorded for the attention of the provost marshal. The kind, tired man read nothing. He just stood there with his hand out and the fog on his shoulders. Then he said, "Sergeant, do you know what you've done?" And the honest answer, the answer I have never given anybody until now, is that I did not. I thought I had written 12 lines in a green book. I did not know that under an act of 1874, those 12 lines could not be unwritten by the king himself. I did not know that a record made by a gate officer in the occurrence book, once it names an offense, obliges the provost marshal to receive it, and once he receives it, he cannot simply put it in a drawer, because it is a record made under statute, and the statute has teeth that have not been used since a coachman was found drunk on the same gravel 150 years ago. I did not know that at 4 o'clock that afternoon, a woman I had never met, a provost marshal's clerk of 26 named Rosalind Ivy, who I have since bought a drink, and who I would stand in front of a car for, would take my green book out of a locked cabinet, read 12 badly written lines, and pick up a telephone. I did not know that by 6 o'clock the phrase criminal inquiry would exist inside that building for the first time in living memory, and that it would exist because of a sheet of paper, and a fountain I have never seen, and a man who could not put a child in a seat. I only knew that a girl in a green coat had looked at me through fog for a second and a half, and that I had not, in 11 years, ever moved. And that morning, God help me, I had. They sent me home at 4 o'clock. Not dismissed. Nobody says dismissed. A staff captain I'd never spoken to came down to gate 3 with a piece of paper and told me I was being placed on administrative leave with full pay, pending a review of a procedural matter, and that I should not discuss the procedural matter with anyone, and that the palace was grateful for my long service. I said, "Am I being investigated, sir?" He looked at the fountain. He couldn't see it either. "Nobody's being investigated, Sergeant," he said. "That's rather the point." The bus. I took the bus home. You wouldn't think that would be the thing I remember, but it is. 11 years, and every one of those days ended the same way, off the gravel, through the staff gate, down the hill, the number 12 to Ashcombe Row, a seat by the window if I was lucky. Same bus. Same driver on Fridays, a man called Dennis who never said a word to anybody and once got out in the rain to help a woman lift a pram. And I sat on that bus on the 14th of March with a green ledger's worth of trouble in my head, and I looked at my own reflection in the window, and I did not recognize the man in it. Because here's what nobody prepares you for. When you do something you believe was right, you expect to feel a certain way afterwards. You expect a kind of quiet warmth, something to hold. I felt sick. I felt like a man who had made a terrible, showy, self-important mistake and had involved a 7-year-old child in it. That's the truth. That was the state I was in. Ada was doing homework at the kitchen table when I came in 3 hours early in uniform. She looked up and she went absolutely still, the way children do, and she said, "Are you sacked?" And Bate, who was 5, came running from the front room and grabbed my leg and said, "Did you move?" Because that was the joke in our house. That was the whole family joke for years. Daddy stands still. Bate used to try and make me laugh at the kitchen table, do her worst face, wave her arms, and I'd hold it dead straight for as long as I could. She thought it was the funniest thing in the world that a grown man's job was to not move. I sat down on the floor of my own hallway with my cap in my hands and my little girl holding my knee, and I said, Yes, love. I moved. My wife. Marion cleaned wards at the district hospital, nights mostly. She came in at midnight and I was still sitting up, and I told her everything. And she listened the whole way through without once saying, "Oh God," or "You didn't," or any of the things I was braced for. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. She had her shoes off and her feet up on the other chair, and she was rubbing her ankle, which always hurt her. Then she said, "Was there a booster seat?" "No." "Then you're not mad," she said. "Now go to bed." I want to say, because this has been written about, and written about wrongly, that my wife never once told me I had done a brave thing. Not that night, not in the 71 days that followed. She never used that word. What she did instead was pack me sandwiches every morning as though I were going to work, and put them by the door, and I ate them sitting in the park at the bottom of Ashcombe Row like a man on a lunch break, in uniform, because I could not bring myself to wear anything else. 71 days. Miss Ivy. On the 9th day, a woman knocked on my door. Small, 26 or so, in a coat too thin for March, with a document wallet under her arm and rain in her hair. She showed me a card that said Office of the Provost Marshal, Clerk. Rosalind Ivy. "Sergeant Bear," she said, "I'm the person who read your book." I made her tea. She sat in my front room, where the wallpaper was coming away above the radiator, and she balanced the cup on her knee, and she asked me one question. She asked what the child had been doing when I first saw her. And I said, sitting still, facing forward, hands on her knees. Miss Ivy put her tea down. Not looking out of the window. No. Not asking where she was going. No. "Sergeant," she said, "children are the noisiest creatures God ever built. If you had put my nephew in the back of a car at 6:30 in the morning, he would have been asking questions before the handbrake came off." She looked at the wallpaper. A child that sits still and says nothing has already worked out that something is wrong and has decided that the safest available course is to be quiet. Nobody had said that to me. Not one person in 9 days. And I had to get up and stand at the window with my back to her for a minute, and she let me. Then she told me what her office had found in 9 days. Rufus Aldencourt's grandmother, the one who was 89, the one who was dying, the one who had asked for the child, had died 3 years earlier, in a hospice in Coldwater. Miss Ivy had the certificate in her wallet. She'd got it in an afternoon. It cost her £4. He had built the whole thing on a woman who was already in the ground, because he assumed nobody would ever check, because in that building nobody ever checks him. "And the house he was driving to," I said. "He wasn't driving to a house," she said. "He was driving to a lay-by." The lay-by. I'm going to tell this part quickly, because it is the ugliest part and it does not deserve any lingering. Rufus Aldencourt owed money. He had owed money for years, and it had stopped being the sort of money a man clears. Somewhere in the previous autumn, his debts had been bought up, all of them, quietly, at once, by a man called Coyle, who did not want to be repaid. Coyle wanted 11 minutes. That was the arrangement. 11 minutes in a lay-by off the Coldwater Road at 7:30 in the morning with a photographer in the back of a van. Not a hair on her head touched. Nobody spoke to her. She wouldn't even have got out of the car. Photographs, that was all. A 7-year-old princess, alone, unguarded, in a car with a man, on an empty road 40 miles from the nearest protection officer. And then Coyle would own those photographs. Forever. And he would never have to sell them. He would simply have them in a drawer for the rest of Rufus Aldencourt's life, and quite possibly the rest of the child's, and every time he wanted something he would think of that drawer. That was the whole plot. It was not violent. It was not even in the ordinary sense dangerous. It was worse, it was arithmetic. And what has stayed with me, what I have never got out from under, is that Rufus Aldencourt told himself it was small. I am certain of it. I saw his face at the window and there was no evil in it. There was a man who had done a sum and decided that 11 minutes was cheap, and that his sister would never know, and that nothing would actually happen. He was right that nothing would have happened. That is exactly what a man like that cannot understand. The harm was not in the 11 minutes. The harm was in the drawer. The room. I gave evidence on the 40th day. In a long room in the West Wing with a fire that didn't work, and 11 men and Miss Ivy. The Queen Consort was there. I had never been in a room with her. In 11 years I had seen her perhaps 200 times, at 40 feet, through glass. She was 61 and she sat at the end of the table with her hands folded, and she did not look at her son once, the entire morning, not one time. She looked at me. They took me through it. Times, distances, the sheet, the telephone, the 18 inches. A lawyer for the household, a courteous man, genuinely courteous. I bear him no ill will, spent an hour establishing very gently that I could not possibly have seen a booster seat through tinted glass in fog, and that my recollection was therefore unreliable, and that a tired man at the end of a night shift might construct a memory to fit a conclusion he had already reached. He was good, he was very good. Halfway through I began to doubt myself. And then he asked me why, if I truly believed a child was being abducted, I had not simply pulled the driver from the vehicle. And I said, because that isn't the order, sir. He waited. The order is, obstruct and report, not pursue, not detain, not lay hands on a member of the household. If I dragged that man out of his car, I'd have been a sergeant of the guard assaulting the Queen Consort's son on palace ground with no authorization and no witnesses, and by lunchtime the story would have been about me. I looked at the dead fire. The orders aren't there to make us brave, sir. They're there for the mornings when being brave would ruin everything. All I had to do was stand still and write it down. Nobody said anything for a while. Then the Queen Consort spoke, and it was the only time she spoke all day. She said, "Sergeant, did my son threaten you?" And I thought about it properly. I owed her that, and I owed him that, whatever he was. "No, ma'am," I said. "He offered to telephone you." Something went across her face. I've never been able to name it. It was there and gone in less than a second, and then she was folded and still again, and she nodded once, and she looked down at the table, and she did not look up again while I was in the room. What the child said. They did not let me hear her evidence. Of course they didn't. She gave it in a different room, on a different day, to a woman with soft shoes, with Hendry sitting in the corner because she wouldn't do it otherwise. Miss Ivy told me afterwards, months afterwards, over a drink in a pub that smelled of wet coats, and she wasn't supposed to, and I have never repeated it until now. They asked Princess Eloan why she got into the car. She said, "He told me we were going to see the horses." They asked why she didn't call out, why she didn't say anything to anyone, all the way down the drive, all the way to the barrier. And she said, 7 years old, hands in her lap, "I didn't know I was allowed to." Then they asked her, because they had to, whether she had known anything was wrong. And she said yes. They asked how. And she said, because the man at the gate turned his head. Miss Ivy had to stop there and go and stand outside the pub for a minute. So did I later, at home, in the garden in the dark, where nobody could see. Because that child had lived her whole life inside those railings, and to her the guards were not men. We were part of the building. We were furniture that breathed. She had walked past us 1,000 times and pulled faces at us the way my bait pulled faces at me, and we had never, not once in her entire remembered life, so much as blinked. We had made a promise to her without ever once speaking to her. 11 years of rain and schoolchildren and men in suits trying to make us laugh, all of that, every hour of it, had been building one single fact in the mind of a small girl. They do not move. So when I turned my head and looked at her through the fog, and my face did something. She knew. She knew before the inquiry knew. She knew before I knew. She sat up on her knees and put her hands flat on the glass because, for the first time in her life, the building had flinched, and a 7-year-old understood exactly what that meant and had no words for it and no permission to say it, and so she did the only thing left to her. She looked at me, and she waited to see what I would do. A second and a half. The end of it. Rufus Aldencourt was charged on the 63rd day. There was no great scene. There never is. He was not taken from a ball in handcuffs. He walked into a police station in Coldwater on a wet Tuesday with 2 solicitors, and he was out again by 6, and 11 months later he pleaded to a charge of child abduction and one of conspiracy, and he was sentenced to 4 years and served 26 months. Coyle got 9. He never gave a name and he never explained himself, and as far as I know, he has never said one word about any of it to anybody. The household issued a statement of 41 words. I have read it perhaps 100 times and there is nothing in it. It does not contain the word sorry and it does not contain the word guard. The Queen Consort did not attend the trial. She has not been seen at Thornevale since the spring of that year. She lives, they say, in a house near the sea, and she has never spoken about her son publicly, not once, not to defend him and not to condemn him, and I have come to believe that this silence has cost her more than anything the rest of us went through. I was reinstated on the 71st day. No apology, a letter, no fault is found, signed by a man I never met. And there was talk, I heard it from 3 directions, of moving me somewhere warm and indoors. A nice post. Sergeant of the household plate, something like that. A room with a fire and a pension at the end of it, and never another wet morning in my life. I asked to go back to Gate 3. Gate 3. I stood there another 6 years. I read the sheet twice, every morning, the way I always had. Nettle got over his cold and got a different cough and eventually retired to a bungalow in Marsh Hollow and sends a card at Christmas. Miss Ivy went to the bar. Hendry had his knee done at last, and it never came right, and they gave him a desk, and he hated it. Nobody at the palace ever mentioned it to me again. Not once. 11 men in a room with a dead fire, and then 6 more years of mourning, Sarge and filthy out, and never a word. That's not coldness, I want to be clear. That's just how it is inside those walls. The building goes on. The building always goes on. That is what buildings are for. But about 2 years after, on an ordinary afternoon in September, a car came down from the East Arch. Palace car, roundel on the wing, protection officer driving, movement on my sheet in ink from the night before, signed for, all correct. And as it went past me, the rear window came down. She was 9 by then, long-legged, hair pulled back. She had a school bag on her lap, an actual school bag, because things had changed after all that. Quite a lot of things had changed. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She was 9 and she had been raised in that building, and she understood the rules better than most adults ever will. She just looked at me for about a second and a half until the car was passed. And I stood there in the sun with my chin up and my eyes front, absolutely still, the way I had stood for 17 years, the way I will stand until they put me in the ground. Because that is the whole of it, and it took me half my life to understand. People think the job is standing still. It isn't. Any fool can stand still. The job is standing still for 11 years so that on one gray morning, when it matters, a frightened child looking through a car window will understand exactly what it means. When you finally move.